Welcome to Inner Peace with Dr. Reese, a program that can help you become liberated in the modern world. Now, here's your host, Dr. Kevin W. Reese.
Did you know that beingness is everything? Welcome to episode number 77. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming back Prem Vishrant, the awakened spiritual teacher from Perth, Australia. So much to talk about today, and I don't even know if this could be considered an interview. This might be a personal Satsang between me and him. Of course, Vishrant was on the podcast for episode 42, and if you were paying attention, you saw what he tried to do to me. And since then, that was our first time meeting. 9 months ago or whatever it was, lots has changed. And I explained that in episode number 70. So please, grab a warm beverage, sit down and relax. And let's begin. Vishrant, welcome back to the Inner Peace podcast.
Nice to be here.
Who or what is awareness?
Everything is awareness. Everything is beingness. And this is where people make a mistake. They keep looking for it somewhere else outside of themselves. And we are that we are looking for. And we always have been that we are looking for. Without a thought, we're here. Pure awareness is here, without a thought. It's always here.
What happens when awareness becomes aware of itself?
If that occurs in a human being, and it's ongoing, it is called enlightenment. And then that human being doesn't live as an ego anymore. They exist as beingness, which they already are. We are already that. But the ego drops. And so the sense of being a somebody or being an identity disappears, and there's this just vast space because the noisy one has gone.
Earlier today, I had a gentleman on my podcast named Peter Panagore, and so he died in 1981, and he explains his experience as vastness of nothingness.
Yeah.
And a feeling of intense love and acceptance, but it was just dark nothingness. Just like Gautama the Buddha talks about nothingness. No vision of his body, body's gone, dropped, right?
Yeah.
That's this awareness, isn't it?
It is. And when awareness is just on that, basically you exist as that. But when awareness is on that and also out here, you're living out here as well. So it's like having 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Making the transition from ego-based reality to being-based reality is difficult. But then making the transition from being-based reality and then being in the world is also difficult, because all the reference points that you used to judge the world by don't exist anymore. You're free of the mind. And so for me, it was fortunate that I actually had teachers in town when awakening was occurring, and I was able to sit with them and talk with them. So awareness was in, but it was also out at the same time. And then fortunately, in my circumstance, there was another man in Perth, West Australia, who had woken up, and I was able to sit with him every day for a year or so, and we'd converse. And basically, in a lot of ways, it's about practicing being out while being in, because you lose the human to a large degree. After awakening, I didn't blink. I just used to stare into space. And I didn't look away when I spoke to people. I'd just stare straight at them. And it was clear that it was intimidating to humans that there was someone so gone. And so I had to learn to be human-like to connect and communicate with humans.
Mm.
Which, when you think of it, it's bizarre, but really we're not the I, we're not the body, we're not the mind, we are beingness. And beingness is not human. Beingness is everything.
Right. Well, we spoke on the phone just last week, I think it was, and you were saying that there was such a detachment from everything for you now.
There has been for 21 years.
Yeah.
It took a week for my wife to really work out that what had happened was she had lost her husband. And that was very sad for her at the time because the old Vishrant was no longer here. The mannerisms of the old Vishrant were still here, and the personality to some degree, but the one who thought he was Vishrant was no longer present. And in place of that, there was silence and stillness. So she felt like she'd lost her husband.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you're a grandfather, you have puppies, right? Didn't you just get a puppy?
Yeah.
So how do you connect with children and puppies, and are you able to still be human-like with them?
Well, I know what to do. I know how to be in the world because I was living as a human being for a lot of years, 45 years. So I knew what was expected of me as a human being. But really, it's just an act because I'm a nobody going nowhere. But everybody is, but most people think there is somebody going somewhere. But if we take away our imagination, that's not true because that somebody is made up of imagination of reference points from the past projected to the future, none of which are real. So everybody's acting and pretending to be somebody, but most people don't realize they're acting or pretending. I know I'm acting and pretending. This is a role right now. Talking to you is a role. It's a role of someone who's supposed to be awake, but there's actually nobody here. The chair is empty.
What happens when you close your eyes?
This world doesn't exist anymore, and I go into the blackness or the vastness. But I'm using English to describe it. There's no I that goes in. There's just nothingness, but vast nothingness.
And that's what this gentleman was describing on his death experience. That vastness.
Yeah. So that started occurring for me in 1987, but it wasn't until 1999 that was continuous every moment.
Mm.
So there was a time period of what I call a flip-flopping, knowing self as truth, knowing self as ego, knowing self as truth, knowing self as ego, a back and forward kind of yo-yo effect.
That's what I'm going through now.
Yeah, heaven and hell. Heaven and hell. Because to live as a human with an ego is suffering, and to live as beingness is not.
Ever since I started, learning under you is when I learned to accept it. In 2018, I had what you would call a satori or two after I discovered Osho, right? And listening to his satsangs, he took me somewhere. Man's been dead for 30 years and still took me somewhere.
Yeah, the energy field is still in the videos and the podcasts.
Yeah.
Transmitted through the voice.
Yeah.
And the image. And I don't know how that works, but I know that works. Well, when I was a seeker, I used to study Ramana Maharshi. Now, he died 4 years before I was born, but I used to get quite a hit off him.
Yeah. And so, even after these amazing small awakenings, we'll call them, that sort of follows what some people would call dark night of the soul, just a feeling of, I want to go back to that, where, it's like having pineapple for the first time. It's like, that's good. Give me some more of that,
After the ecstasy, the laundry is a good way of putting it, because to know self as truth, there's a certain ecstasy or bliss. And then you come back and you have to do the laundry. And the laundry is all the stuff that you haven't dealt with as a psyche in this life and previous lives. So everything comes out. And it comes out through patterning that is defensive. So it's difficult.
Yeah, and then I met you, and you were on this podcast, you know, episode 42, which must have been 8, 9, maybe even 10 months ago. I'm pretty sure you tried to you tried to drag me out to deep waters and drown me on my own podcast.
I remember I did. That's what I'm supposed to do.
That's your job. You're a murderer.
Well, who you think you are is not real. You're better off without it. The ego is misery-based, not joy-based.
So when I started, you know, watching your videos and your satsangs and talking to you, I started to accept that I was in this flip-flop type of mode, you know? And it's just going to take some discipline. It's going to take discipline, you know? I got to double down.
The more awareness you put on truth, the more chance there is of that staying available. Whatever you put into it, it's like where we put our energy, where do we put our awareness? If all we do is put it on our mind and what we think, we get to live as our mind and what we think. But if we keep turning awareness back to itself, we start to exist as pure beingness, pure consciousness, because awareness is aware of itself.
Yeah, and the mind can take us into a story or, you know, a fantasy for let's just call it 5 minutes, right? So, boom, and then you wake up after 5 minutes, and you know, if you're aware of this, you can watch it, and that's the trick of watching it instead of just falling into it and then fall into another one and then fall into another one.
Well, you're walking around an abyss that's called truth, and at some stage you discover you are the abyss, and you haven't just fallen in, you've disappeared, and now you're knowing yourself as truth. But that's by grace. I don't know actually how that occurs. It either happens or it doesn't happen. And all you can do is put yourself in the right place for that to occur. And the right place for that to occur is to keep turning awareness back to itself.
Yeah, one of the practices that I learned from you was self-inquiry.
See, if someone wakes up, they become a light on the planet so others can see. So my intention is to help as many lights happen as possible, because I think that unless this planet has more consciousness on it, it's pretty much doomed.
Oh, yeah.
Lower consciousness is rife, and it's why we have wars and terrorism and rapes and murders and theft. And it's why we don't take care of the poor. It's why we have racism. It's why we have sexism. This is all lower consciousness. Higher consciousness is what affords change. So the revolution has to become inside of you, so you can get free of all the limiting programs that have been put in you, so your mind will support truth instead of supporting lower consciousness. And so I take you out to the deep water and I'll leave you there.
Why, you know, self-inquiry, it's so interesting. You know, I can go on a walk and catch myself thinking about whatever it is. And then I have to kind of stop it and say, hey, who's aware? What's aware?
Yeah.
What's going on here?
Unless, of course, awareness is already on it, so then you don't need to do that. See, that's the thing. It's like Ramana Maharshi was asked the question, when do I stop self-inquiring? And his answer was beautiful: when there is nobody left to inquire.
Right. If somebody's doing self-inquiry, but they're still in a dreamlike state, they're going to be checking themselves quite a bit, right? I mean, it's going to happen time after time after time.
That's why it needs to happen a lot. Self-inquiry needs to be continuous. If we're doing pure self-inquiry as a methodology to enlightenment, every thought that arises should be inquired into. Whence does this thought come? Who's aware of this thought? And this is pure Advaita Vedanta methodology. And this is towards the end of Before Awakening for me. That was my methodology. Every thought that was arose in the mind was challenged with who's aware.
And of course, we need more, right? We need that meditation. We need witnessing the mind.
Yeah, witnessing the mind.
And openness.
Openness is lovely. But you're talking about things that annihilate the ego. That's what you're talking about. You know, we start witnessing the mind. We're starting to see through it all the rubbish that it puts up. We're starting to see all the belief systems that keep us closed, shut, defended, and limited. And then we have a choice. Then we can choose not to run those or not.
Openness. Let's talk about openness. Using myself as an example, I've always been a very closed-off person. I was just like you, you know, a business mind, a Sherman tank, as you would call it. And the only time I ever got open was when I found a female companion that I really liked. That's the only time I would kind of open up and be vulnerable, really. Everything else closed off. Is the method to start opening up to everything and not just the girl you like? Also, is it best to, you know, maybe get with a female companion and that can kind of be a device for openness?
Anything that contracts us can be our teacher. So anytime we get defenses that's facilitated can be used as a teacher, because it shows us something about us. It shows us where we're closing and how we're closing and possibly why we're closing. But the intention underneath it all has to be openness. We have to see openness as a way to freedom.
Do we have to be vulnerable?
Yeah.
We have to be uncomfortable.
Well, human beings are uncomfortable, aren't they?
So would a relationship be a device for that?
I found that I learned more about surrender through being in relationship than any other way, because the person that you're closest to is going to get you because you care about them. So they're likely to trigger you the most. And that gives you an opportunity to see how you're closed, where you're closed, why you're closed. And instead of being righteous and arrogant and defensive, you practice openness and see if you can't be more accepting, more open. You let go and you remove the belief systems that are involved in the closure. So I found relationships brilliant for practicing openness.
It seems paradoxical too, because if awareness becomes aware of itself, then you become completely unattached, like you talked about with your wife.
The attachment disappears as a result of awakening. Trying to be unattached before awakening is difficult because the mind is programmed to be attached, as the same as it's programmed to desire. But after awakening, attachments disappear because you are beingness. You're not this thing that gets attached anymore. The survival mechanism has dropped. There's just a space where it used to be. So along with that, you also lose all fear. Fear, which is a primary defense system for the body and mind, drops as well. And so you end up fearless, which is pretty cool.
So in doing that, the person that you're in a relationship with may end up suffering too, right?
Everybody who's human suffers because of desires for things to be changed, things to be different. Everyone suffers, and because we get attached to things and then fear losing them. If we really examine the mind, if we watch the mind, we can see that it is actually a machine that's designed for suffering because of our constant desiring for things to be different, which is dissatisfaction.
Right.
The only way out of that really is to wake up, to our true nature, to live as, or to exist as beingness rather than to live as an I. And so ultimate freedom is brought about by a revolution that the mind has against itself.
I have found in my inner work and just observing everything that there seems to be two types of awakened people. One is sort of the super aware person that's in beingness, such as yourself, Osho, tons of Zen masters. You can see it. You can sit there and everything's all good. The other type that I've noticed, and they might not be fully awakened, but they're definitely higher consciousness at least. They're just a ball of light. Like they just want to hug everybody. And I just had a guy on the podcast just like that. And he was like a puppy. He was just beaming and just total joy. Can those people be fully awakened, or are they just at a higher consciousness level on the cusp of it, or is it just a personality thing?
An awake person can be anything. You know, that's because the identity's gone. But what happens to awake people is they tend to enjoy silence and stillness a great deal. And so they do become quite silent and still, though they can be in the material world quite active. But they become silent inside themselves. And emotionality tends to disappear. And so the qualities that we would consider human disappear and are replaced with profound contentment for no reason and bliss. And so people who are awake do tend to be a little different. They don't tend to be gushy or all over the place. They tend to be quite still and silent. Though before awakening, a person who's trained the mind to be accepting can be very exuberant, very loving and very caring because they have a lot of love in their life, because the obstacles that are in the way of love are out of the way. And this is higher consciousness. And so higher consciousness is brilliant because it affords you out of suffering to a large degree, and it affords you love.
And higher consciousness would be considered the level before full enlightenment?
Yes. Higher consciousness is still within the mind. Then there's super consciousness, which is beyond the mind. That's when that's aware of the mind becomes aware of itself in a continuing manner. Super consciousness is very different than higher consciousness, but if we have a preference, lower consciousness sucks. It's way better to get out of to do something to get out of lower consciousness towards higher consciousness. Even if you don't wake up, at least you're going to have a way better life in higher consciousness than lower consciousness.
Right. You know, when you were last on this podcast, which is episode 42 for those listening, we detailed your story pretty deeply. One of the follow-ups I wanted to ask you is, what do you think took you so long to become fully awakened? It happened to you at 45 years old. And, you know, based on your satsangs, you talk about joining encounter groups and really putting in some work at 19.
Yeah.
So 19 and 45, that's a nice gap.
It is, and there was a lot of work, but a lot of my teachers weren't awake. They were just people who were a bit further ahead in certain areas, and I'd taken them on as teachers because they were further ahead in certain areas. And this is a big if awake teachers had been available for me at the age of 19, awakening may have occurred a lot earlier, but of course I don't know that. I just was lost for a long time. That was my karma. I was lost in trying to problem solve, work things out, analyze, because I thought, because I was programmed to analyze, that was the answer. It took me a while to recognize that analyzing is just another dream, and it keeps you stuck in the ego because it's the ego doing the analyzing. So I collected knowledge like most spiritual seekers do from Osho and from every other teacher that I could. And I studied those videos and those tapes and collected knowledge and knew a lot about enlightenment, but it doesn't do anything for you. The only thing that works is practice. That self-inquiry, the practice of openness, the practice of meditation, these things work. Collecting knowledge doesn't. It doesn't make you more conscious. It doesn't do anything for your consciousness levels, actually. But we're led to believe it does. So the big trap for seekers is actually collecting knowledge and thinking they can do it by themselves. It's not true.
A mystic is based on first-hand information.
Yeah, the direct experiencing of whatever it is for self, rather than the collection of anything from anywhere else.
Yeah.
That's hard for us to make the changeover, because when we went to school, you became a doctor as a result of studying, remembering things, and passing exams. And that's how people approach spirituality as well, but it's an incorrect approach because it doesn't work. What works is practice. You practice openness, you practice meditation, you practice self-inquiry. You practice the things that raise your consciousness levels to a level that you can actually then have super consciousness.
Mm.
And during that practice, you annihilate the I.
Yeah, I like to say it's a transformation from I to be.
Well, the I never really existed in the first place. You try finding the I. Look, see if you can find the I. You won't find it anywhere. It doesn't exist.
Imagination.
It's just imagination. So there's no real transformation. There's an absence.
You know, you once told me that there are some things that happen that you can't explain. And because you don't know anyone that it has, is at your level or higher, you've nobody to ask. So you just have to kind of deal with not knowing, right?
Yeah, but I'm absolutely perfectly happy with not knowing.
Right.
The need to know is a need to control. And I have no need to control. I have no need to know. It's just a part of the survival mechanism, the need to know. It needs to know so it can control and survive. When that drops, there's no need to know anymore. The thirst for truth has to be there right till the end. Otherwise, you won't do what's required to facilitate enlightenment. So there's one desire that is worthy, and that desire is the desire to know yourself as truth or to know truth. That desire should always be promoted, and it will drop towards the end, but it'll drop of its own accord.
I just recently had Vina Schlegel on the podcast. She lived with Osho for 19 years. Inner circle status. And she had a lot of stories.
Ah.
And what a recording. I mean, one of the things we talked about was the blinking, him not blinking a lot. He blinked like once a minute. And he sat there in his satsangs with his leg crossed for almost 2 hours at a clip.
That's right.
Never moved his leg.
No.
How is that humanly possible?
He wasn't human.
It's the only explanation, right?
Mm.
He was just beingness.
That's right. He's just beingness, and the human was gone. And he spent a lot of time gone. I started disappearing about 13, 14 years ago from being out here. And so I put a lot of things in play that kept me out here, because I could see that I was moving into a more sattvic stage of enlightenment. And I didn't want to be ineffective for my Sangha or my children who were still growing. So I actually put a lot of things in place to keep my awareness out here. I kept myself busy out here because the pull back in is very strong. So I started riding motorbikes again and started getting involved in training people in martial arts again, medieval martial arts, which is teaching people how to be present to reality. Most people are dreaming. And so when you can get them to come back to reality, whatever works to get them to come back to reality, it's reclaiming reality from the dream that most adults are lost in. But for me, I was just disappearing too rapidly. And I felt that it would be better for everybody that I was being a light for to be out here more. And so I looked at Osho and I could see that he was really gone. He is gone beyond. And if I shut my eyes, there I go. But if I spend an afternoon by myself, I lose the ability to use language. I can't talk anymore. And so I have people around me a lot who keep me out so I can continue to operate out here.
And we've talked about this on the podcast a lot. A lot of masters need something to keep them grounded, keep them earthly. Sometimes it's food. Sometimes it's on a motorbike. Sometimes it's, whatever it is, it just, I got you. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah, well, I still do. I drink cups of tea during satsang, which I sip because my satsangs are usually 2 hours. The cup of tea keeps me out. The flavour, the heat, the taste, it keeps me out and allows me to be more available to whoever's talking to me in satsang.
Your body sort of floats away if you don't ground it with something, right?
It seems that way, yeah. The association with the body's limited.
Does that mean you can handle pain very well?
Yeah, I disassociated to a level where I don't actually react to pain. Though I am relatively grounded in my body because before awakening I did a lot, for years and years I did a lot of physical activities that allowed me to get into my body. So when awakening occurred, I was very grounded in my body as far as awareness locked in the body. See, a lot of people get grounded in their minds, but I preferred the groundedness in the body because it's less problematic. To be grounded in your mind, you're really lost in a dream world in a lot of ways.
I started doing what I call push-up meditations. Mm-hmm. So I get down and I bang out anywhere from 10 to 25 push-ups. Then I get up and I sit in a chair. Mm-hmm. And the heart is, you can hear it. Vroom, 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 vroom. And I'm meditating through it. And I'm trying to watch it. And it's been very interesting.
It's just giving you something to watch that's very noticeable, that's all.
Very noticeable.
But that's meditation is simply being aware of what is real. And so if your heart's pumping strongly and you have your awareness on it, you are in meditation. But you can be in meditation simply by watching the silence and stillness. Depends on what level of meditation, what your mind has got to with meditation.
The gentleman that I talked about to you earlier, Peter Panagore, who was on the podcast, and I said he died twice. Once in 1981 and once in 2015. And in 2015, he had a heart attack. And he was laying there on the grass, and he just went into a meditation, and he was able to rise above the pain of the heart just contracting. And he just meditated through the whole thing because he already had experience with doing it. And that's what I guess made me think of that whole push-up meditation is. Yeah.
Osho's meditations were a little different, particularly dynamic and kundalini, because they were very physical meditations, but they were basically designed to, in a lot of ways, release energy from the body that was pent up in the body. So then when the sitting occurred, you could be quiet because all this pent-up energy had been released.
Veena said on the call, the dynamic was the best thing since Buddha's Vipassana. Best thing. But a lot of people can't do it because the neighbors will call the cops on you because all the screaming and everything. And she said that's the one limitation. You have to kind of be in a meeting ground that's kind of away from society.
Yeah, in a lot of ways that's true. I did dynamic for gosh, 10 years. I loved it. And Kundalini, I loved them because they allowed me to sit. My whole thing really wasn't those meditation techniques. It was sitting silently. But to get to that silence and stillness dynamic, which is very physical, and Kundalini, which is very physical, allowed the expression of all the energy I was carrying from the day to leave. And then my mind could just be quiet in the sitting.
Going back to what we were talking about with your body, you're, what are you, about 66, 67, somewhere in there?
Yeah, nearly 67 now, the body is, yeah.
So you're a senior citizen.
I've been a senior citizen for a while.
And so the body naturally breaks down as it gets into those ages. You just watch it? You just watch it kind of break down a little bit?
I do. I mean, before awakening, I was a naturopath. And so and part of being a naturopath is being a dietitian. And so my body is taken care of very well. It's fed the right food and it's exercised the right way. So it's handling life pretty well currently. I've taken a completely vegan diet, which has been wonderful for everything, as far as the body's concerned. And I walk every day. That's one of the reasons I got the dogs. So I've got someone to walk with, because by myself, I would not walk.
Really?
I just sit still in a lounge chair and do nothing, because that's what I love to do. It's blissed out to the max. The dog needs to be walked, so I take the dog. I take two dogs actually for a walk, and quite often the cat comes as well. Every morning. And every afternoon as well. I do 2 walks.
So this goes back to what we were talking about with being grounded on Earth.
If you don't take care of the vehicle, the body, it will die. It needs maintenance. So I think few people who wake up, they don't take care of their bodies and they die, because they're not there to protect the body from the different things that can occur to it. This is the spacesuit for beingness to be out here. A spacesuit with a crazy computer system that's quietened right down to nothing. But it's just a spacesuit. And without the spacesuit, awareness couldn't be doing these things out here. And so as the body gets older, it's going to break down. It's got a time limit to it. It's a use-by date. That's okay. You see, everything's okay.
Everything's okay.
Yeah, everything's okay.
When you had your final enlightenment, with your final awakening, if I recall, you said you just woke up and it was there, right?
Yeah, there was nobody there.
So you said you had over 1,000 satoris in a year.
Yeah.
And then one day you went to bed, woke up, and it was just permanent.
Yeah. It's been like that now for 21 years. There's been just pure awareness witnessing, or pure consciousness witnessing, without the identified one.
What was that morning like?
From the mind's perspective, it was surprising, because it didn't expect that would be the case. There was never an expectation from the mind's perspective that enlightenment would occur. There was an attempt for enlightenment by the mind, because it was supporting self-inquiry, but there was never really an expectation that it would ever occur. So when it did occur, it was a surprise. It started to quieten down almost immediately. It just didn't have anything to talk about anymore. The story of it was no longer relevant. The ego is probably the obstacle in the way of enlightenment, but it's not the enemy. It's just something that needs to learn to surrender. And surrendering is not war, it's the opposite of war. Surrender is the end of the battle. It's over. The Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree and surrendered and woke up. I think that's what happens with everybody who wakes up. The mind surrenders and awakening occurs.
and then it only works as a tool.
Well, it's like a tool in a toolbox. It's brought out when it's needed and it's put back in when it's not. So 99.9% of the time it stays quiet because it's not needed.
But you need it for this conversation.
Not in the way you would think. I'm not actually thinking. The words are coming from the nothingness because this is all automatic for me. It's been done so many times before. Like riding a push bike. There's no need to think about riding a push bike. You just ride it because you've done it so many times before. Well, talking to someone about spirituality, I've done thousands and thousands and thousands of times before. So, and my mind doesn't edit itself, so there's a total trust in what's being said. There's no editor, there's no being careful. It just happens automatically.
Can others notice? I mean, I'm not talking about disciples or, your close family and friends. I mean, if you're in a supermarket or something like that, do you think others can notice or they just walk by?
No, they notice. They notice. And the reason they notice is usually if I'm engaging them in some way, like the girl at the cashier at the supermarket or at a restaurant, they lose their mind. And they have problems using a till, or they have problems talking, or they make claims that, I've forgotten what I was doing. Because basically the energy field of anybody who's awake starts to dissolve the mind of anyone they come in contact with. It starts to expand the mind. And so people do notice. But they don't know what they notice.
They don't know what they notice. I was just about to say that.
What I find, though, is they become very generous. A lot of people just want to give me things. People I don't know, strangers. And I think it's because of the energy field that's been carried. They just like it. But they don't know why. Because I don't wear a T-shirt that says, "Hey, I'm enlightened."
Right.
That'd be funny. That would be hilarious. I'm enlightened. Ask me how.
Ask me how. A call to action, right?
Yeah.
Good marketing. So from 45 years old when this happened to you to, into your 60s, you're saying that it's expanded. It just keeps expanding.
Well, more of my mind becomes unavailable, actually. That's a better way to put it, because my mind is affected by the energy field here as well. Affected in a way that it's constantly being expanded. And there seems to be, as time goes by, less and less of the mind present, and less of any type of interest that was there before. It's all just disappears. And so, people talk about wanting to go traveling or, getting out there in the country and having a look around. Well, it's just all that motivation is totally gone. Right here, right now is good enough. Nothing needs to change.
Many times I experience just what I call buzzing, vibration. It's usually right here, and then it happens here. Sometimes the whole face. Sometimes it feels like something's gonna break out, like my skull and my skin are just gonna open up, and something's just gonna come out. It comes and it goes.
So have you seen the movie Alien?
I know what scene you're talking about.
I think you're talking about your third eye.
This has been happening for 8 years. And I'm just kind of learning how to control it a little. I don't want to use the word control. You know what I mean, though. I'm learning how to harness it when I can place my awareness here with my eyes closed. I can actually get it to start buzzing.
Do you ever get a feeling of something around your head, like around your crown, around here?
No.
You don't? Okay, you get this though, the third eye.
And the nose.
Okay.
It always starts in the nose. I don't know why.
Just put awareness there. Don't do anything else. Just put awareness on it. That's all. Third eye. It's nice if the crown starts to open, but that you might need to be in a satsang for that to occur. For me, that's how that occurred. I started getting those openings in satsang with Osho. The third eye started to open, and it felt a bit like a torpedo coming out. And the crown started to, I felt this pressure around my head, which was the crown opening. And that was happening in Osho's presence. And that kind of gives you a connection to everything.
Well, there was one night that I went to sleep with Osho Satsang on the recorder. This is back, again, 2018. And I woke up in the middle of the night and my whole body was buzzing.
Yeah.
The whole thing. I still to this day, I don't know if it was internal or external. I don't know if something was showering down on me or it was me protruding out. But the whole body was vibrating and I was fully awake. And I had to tell myself, just surrender to it. Whatever it is, I don't know what it is, but just surrender to it.
So you can always ask yourself the question, what's aware?
I didn't know about self-inquiry back then.
Because that's still an appearance in who you are,
Right.
rather than who you are. It's an experience, and experiences appear in who you are. They're not who you are.
Yeah, so we probably shouldn't get too caught up in these things, right? And then seeing lights and things like that, right? Because those are just things on the road, on the path. They're just things you're going to witness on the path, right? They're not.
There's the Buddha on the path that needs to be killed.
Yeah.
Because we relate everything back to that. We're caught in our minds again.
Right.
And so we forget we forget our spiritual experiences so we can be fresh to this moment. As long as we're dragging the past in, we're not fresh to this moment. So the expression to kill the Buddha on the path is to forget those things, to let them go, and make it available for what's here now rather than what's happened before.
Right. Back and forth.
Here and now.
Truth-based reality, ego-based reality. Truth-based reality, ego-based reality.
Ego-based reality is always past and future orientated.
I've been a public speaker for so long, 25 years, almost 25 years. And I noticed that my mind does that. It automatically goes to public speaker mode.
But do you find in public speaker mode, if you've done it for that long, that a lot of what you're saying is not thought about, it's just spoken?
When I'm in front of an audience, and a lot of times when I'm on the microphone, yeah, it's almost like a channeling, yeah.
Well, it's not a channeling, it's just that you're not thinking, you're just talking because it's your pattern and your habit to do that. And that's what I was talking about a little earlier. It's just, I don't think, it just comes out.
Right. But I got to get the mind to stop acting it out.
Well, that's just habit, really. A habit of wanting to be careful, a habit of wanting to get it right, a habit of not wanting to be seen in a certain light. Because the moment you start trusting your mind and not editing it, you could get yourself into a lot of trouble. Because you might say things that you don't want to say. But that's what has to happen. You have to let go of the editor. You have to surrender the editor.
The editor.
Yeah.
But my mind also does it even if I don't have a presentation coming up. It just makes up its own. It creates its own seminars.
Sure. It's creative. Very creative.
Yeah. All I can do is just, who's aware? Who's thinking of that? Well,
let's have a look right now. What's happening in your head right now?
Not much.
No, I didn't think so. I was registering you as pretty empty. And this is what happens to people that I talk to. Their mind goes empty, and then they haven't got much to say. And so And then there's a lot of silence.
Right.
And this is what happened to me when I was with Osho. My mind would go silent. It happened with the Advaita Vedanta teachers that I met as well. My mind would go silent. And in that silence, there's so much seeing because there's so much clarity. While the mind's constantly talking to itself, there is actually too many filters to have that much clarity.
It can be tricky to be an interviewer and be empty because you got to think of the next question.
No. Well, that's what happened to me with Osho because I interviewed him
Right.
for 40 minutes in 1985 and I could not think for the life of me. I had a list of questions which I could read to him, but I couldn't even hear him. My mind was too gone. It's gone.
I also want to say, because you told this story on episode 42 when you were on my podcast, and then you've told it on your satsangs as well. But I finally saw the video. I finally saw it. I got to see young 30-something-year-old Vishrant, all full of spunk. It's pretty
I
cool.
was 31 years old, and that was Osho blew my mind, and that was the beginning of the end of Vishrant. Because the Vishrant that did the interview was an arrogant, righteous, full of himself type of person who eventually got annihilated in Osho's washing machine.
He was amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. Vina had a lot of stories. And we covered a lot of ground. You know, when it comes out, I think she's going to send it to a lot of the Osho channels and see who picks it up because, you know, with a lot of misunderstandings about him out there, when something that's truthful happens, I get it out there a little more, you know.
Well, I did an interview with a man called Swaham about a month ago, and we put that up on Facebook, and I think we had 52,000 views of that particular one, which was pretty good because there's so much negativity out there about Osho. It was nice to put some positivity out there about him.
Yeah. She said that he would tell a lot of his inner circle disciples, sannyasins, a lot. He'd say, "Your chatter is disturbing me. Your thinking chatter is disturbing me." Does that happen with you? Do you people's minds?
Yeah, I feel everything. One of the things that it facilitates enlightenment is openness. That means all the defense systems have been dropped somehow. And as a result, you feel everything. Like if I'm in the room with people, I feel them thinking. And I feel the energy they're carrying. I feel everything. Because there's nothing in the way for me not to feel it. There's no defense systems. And so people carry a gift with them wherever they go. They carry their energy field. And a lot of humans carry an energy field that is quite painful because they live in their heads procrastinating and worrying and angsting, and that creates quite a painful energy field, which is very easily perceived.
Have you been able to witness your akashic records?
Ever since 1987. First awakening that occurred in 1987, the akashic records became available.
Did you like what you saw?
I decided that it was a trap, that it was just of interest to the ego, and I knew that I had to go beyond the ego, and so I stopped looking. You see, there's so many traps on the spiritual path. All sorts of realms open up to you. The akashic records open up to you, and the ego gets interested in these things and loses its way because these things are just entertainment for the ego. What has to be of interest is truth itself, the vast nothingness that we are, the vast pure awareness that we are. That has to be the focus of the mind, not the akashic records, not the different realms and places you can go, but truth, beingness itself.
Astral travel, soul travel can also do that as well, right?
Yes, that's true. That's a possibility, and that can be a trap also. Anything that entertains the ego, really, because what you're doing is putting awareness on something outside of yourself again, is a trap. What needs to occur is for awareness to stay aware of itself, and for that to occur, the mind has to actually support it. As long as it's supporting outward adventures, it's probably not going to support the inward adventure.
What's going to happen to the Vishrant Buddhist Society, when you're gone?
I don't mind.
You don't mind?
No. The Vishrant Buddhist Society is currently a vehicle for higher consciousness for those that get involved. And it's working to that end. What happens to it in the future is none of my business.
We once talked, and we had to talk about business. Because I was, again, hopping back and forth from this flip-flopping thing. Sometimes I felt like I didn't want to do any work. I just wanted to sit there and meditate, right? But you said, I'm paraphrasing, but you said, you just build a big old sandcastle. And as much work as it takes, you build your sandcastle. But the waves are going to come destroy it anyway.
That's right. So nothing's permanent. Everything that's built falls down, and everything that's born dies, and that's okay. And so we've been building a sandcastle here, a society that aids higher consciousness. But it's just a sandcastle. If it lasts, it lasts. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It doesn't matter. It's just a lot of fun building it.
And we need to, if we're going to be in the marketplace, we have to make money. That's the rule. It's the rule. So we have to build, everyone has to build their little sandcastle somehow, right?
Well, I've got a better way of looking at it than that. You see, if you're going to have to be here at all, the best way to be here is in service. Because as the heart awakens and affects the mind, you just want to take care of everybody and everything anyway. And so you move to service. You try to help everyone and everything because you want to, because that's your love affair. And part of that is building a vehicle, for me, for higher consciousness for others. So they may get out of the suffering. They may find themselves as truth. Now, whether that lasts or not is irrelevant, because there's only now anyway. Right now, since we started speaking, Tosh, the man who organised this with you, put up the interview that you did with me last time, 6 months ago, I believe. Mm-hmm. And this morning, he only put it up a few hours ago. It's already hit 1,000 people have already listened to it. And so the Dharma, or the teaching of truth, is getting out there as we speak to each other. And I love this. The poor old Buddha, he had to wander around and talk to people one-on-one. With modern technology, I can be talking to you, and 1,000 people can be listening to a talk on the Dharma while I'm talking to you. This is brilliant. Mm-hmm. And that's actually what's currently happening in this moment.
Yeah, I'm just playing my role as an ex-broadcaster who knows how to interview. I'm doing something with it to get that Dharma out, talking to people like you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a great form of service. Gautama the Buddha himself said the greatest karma that can be achieved is to teach the Dharma. And spreading the Dharma is brilliant because you're shining a light so others can see. This is so they can become free. This is brilliant. There's nothing better to do here than that. So thank you.
You're welcome. What if everyone became enlightened?
There's only now, Kevin.
But what if 7 billion people just, boom?
Because there's only now, we don't know if everyone's awake or not, because there's only you and me talking. We don't know what's happening with the rest of the world unless we project, and our projections could be wrong. There's only now, and right now there's us. This is it. And from my perspective, there's nobody here or there. There's only one being, and it's talking to itself.
What about trees and squirrels and birds and the grass and the clouds? It's all one.
Well, they don't talk the same way, but I can hear the wind blowing outside right now. If I look out this window here, I can see the trees are moving because they're being moved by the wind that's blowing, and underneath there's a set of gongs going off because the wind is blowing the chimes. They're perfect as they are, but everything is perfect as it is. Even the misery is perfect as it is. It's like there isn't any mistakes. It is perfection upon perfection upon perfection, which sometimes makes me wonder why I even hold satsang. But I love to be in service. I love to be in service. It's just my love affair with humanity. It's my love affair with life.
Well, it also keeps you grounded. It keeps you here, just like walking the dogs.
But that's so I can do that. That's so I can be there and do that. I don't really have that much interest in walking dogs.
They're so free, aren't they, the dogs? They're
happy. They're happy. They don't worry. They don't get concerned about things. They don't live in a way that humans live, because they don't live in their heads. They live in reality. And so they sleep 18 hours a day and then they play. They have much better lives, and a lot of dogs have much better lives than humans.
and they don't know language, so
They know, come here, bad dog, good dog. And they know we have a thing called smackos here, which is food that they like. They know that word too. It's little strips of something that they really. The dogs that I got are very sensitive. They actually feel the different moods of people in the room. They're quite on the ball, really. They're beautiful.
What's your favorite meal?
My favorite meal? I eat a very limited diet. I have muesli for breakfast, which is bircher muesli, which is soaked muesli with blueberries, and I love that. And when I'm eating that, I love that. So at that moment, that is my favorite meal. And then at lunchtime, I might have fried rice or Thai green curry or something. And when I'm with that, I love that. That's my favorite meal.
Gotcha.
So when you ask me what's my favorite meal, whatever I'm eating at any given moment is my favorite meal.
Understood.
I'm more interested in your finding beingness as yourself.
Me too.
That's actually why I talk to people. It's like I don't really have an interest in the conversation. It's more, what's here that's real? What's real? See, if you look at the emptiness in the silence, in the stillness in your mind, that's real. But nothing else is.
Right. Yeah, you do like that. You did it to me on our first interview. And I noticed you did it with Swaram too.
Yes. What else to do?
Why is it that enlightened beings can be such tricksters, like create devices and things like that? Osho had the Rolls Royces, It's just a device, a joke.
Yeah. That was just advertising to attract business people. You see, the thing about businessmen is a lot of them have quite disciplined minds, which puts them in a good place for higher consciousness. And he first attracted the hippies, and then he attracted the business people. And he was just advertising. So you come here and sit with me. That's what he was doing. Come here and sit with me and find the silence and stillness as yourself. That's what he was up to. And yeah, he's tricky as. And there's a reason for that. It's like you can't come in the front door with most people. It's too defended. You've got to find a side door or a back door, or you've got to come through the roof or burrow underneath, because there's too many defenses up front. The ego protects itself. And so all these devices that are set really are just set so people will learn acceptance and surrender. And Osho's, I believe Osho's main device he was using when he first started was this sexuality thing.
Yes.
Because he wrote the book, From Sex to Superconsciousness. And he said, why don't you all play with each other? Why be settling for Italian when you can have Chinese one night and Greek another night and all these different types of meal? And he was talking about sexuality. Well, at a primal level, we get bonded to people. And so when we start playing around sexually, it takes us into our stuff. But that gives us an opportunity to surrender. So I see the whole sexual journey with Osho as not just a celebration, but also a practice of acceptance and surrender.
That's right.
Through our most primal programs.
And I have that book. It's right there. And I talked about it with Venus Schlegel on the podcast. And yeah, I remember reading that book and being like, there's no sex in here.
No.
I mean, it's the concept of sex is talked about, but there's no like tips and tricks or anything like that.
No, it was a trick. It was a come and sit with me trick. Because when you come into the presence of someone who's awake, there's the potential for enlightenment. And so Osho, I remember being at the ranch with him, and there would have been 20,000 people in front of him. Amazing, amazing amount of people. And he's just radiating beingness. And if someone's ready, that's enough. If they're not ready, it's not enough. But if they're ready, it's enough. It takes them over the edge.
Here's a random thing that just crossed my mind. She said that Osho sometimes would lose anywhere from 2 to 5 pounds after a satsang. Because there was so much energy being used.
Yeah, he had 3 air conditioners on him. I think he got overheated by the amount of energy that he was taking on from his sannyasins. You see, energy flows from full to empty. And most human beings are relatively full because of how they think. And so they're full of certain pain bodies and densities. Whereas Osho was absolutely empty. So energy would have been flowing into him from all his sannyasins constantly. And I think it overheated him because of the rapid nature of the energy coming in. And I think that's why he needed the air conditioning. When I interviewed him, the room was 0. You know, like we were led into a room with 20-odd people there, but the temperature in the room was 0. It was freezing. And I think that that's what he needed to feel comfortable with the amount of energy that he was taking off people in close proximity.
She also said that, I mean, he was diligent about his nap. He had to take his nap every day. And I asked her why. Why was that nap? And she said, I think he had to regenerate. That was how he got his battery back up.
I think more than likely he was taking on a lot of density from people around him, and it was wasting him. You see, when energy comes in rapidly, it's actually physically painful. Now, he wouldn't have been registering that pain because he was surrendered, but the body would have been affected by it. This is why I think he had the air conditioners on him all the time as well. And so the body would have been wrecked by the amount of energy coming in rather than the amount of energy going out.
So if you were doing a satsang in front of, let's just say 5,000 people live, not on Zoom, would that zap you? Would that just...
It always zaps me. Yeah, I run retreats from time to time, 4 days to 7 days, and I'm always pretty wrecked. The body's always pretty wrecked afterwards. But it's not a result of the amount of energy being put out. It's the amount of energy being taken on, that's coming in.
Mm.
It wrecks the body. And so I sleep 4 hours every night. That's about it. That's all I need. But after retreats, sometimes I need to sleep a bit longer than that because the body needs to recover from the battering that it's received when people are expelling their densities. Because they do. You come into satsang and you get opened up and everything starts pouring out.
It's like what he was talking about with the chattering minds. Your chattering minds are disrupting me.
Maybe it could have been that. It's hard to say. Like I never had access to talk to him about this stuff.
Yeah.
I can only talk about my experience. There's no problem with energy going out. The energy coming in is the problem.
Mm.
Lots of energy goes out, but if you're wide open, that happens anyway. You know, it's the energy coming in that can actually affect the body.
When you sleep, there's no dreams.
I haven't had a dream in 21 years. Yeah. I shut my eyes, go into the blackness, and then 4 hours later, I wake up out of the blackness, become conscious out of the blackness. And even in the blackness, there's consciousness to some degree. But the mind, the body gets to rest, gets to have a very deep, deep rest.
And your mind's always at rest.
Pretty much. It doesn't stress. It doesn't spend time thinking about things, wondering, procrastinating. It just stays quiet. So with talking to you, because there's no one else in the room here, it's relatively very peaceful.
When you woke up that day in 1999 and it was permanent.
I didn't know it was permanent.
Okay.
I was surprised every day for the next month.
Okay.
I'd morning and there'd still be no one here and still just vast nothingness.
Okay.
My mind was surprised.
Okay, I see what you're saying. And I heard you say in the Satsang that your mind would still chatter a little bit for about 6 months.
A little bit, yeah.
And then
It was like having a television set in your room that was talking. And then at some point it would shift to another room, but you could still hear it. And then at another point it would shift to a further room, but you could still hear it. And so there was not being paid any attention to it, but it was still going, but it was getting further and further away.
Interesting. Sounds lovely.
Yeah, look, not being involved in the mind is lovely. The mind is problematic because we were all programmed and trained to solve problems. That's what we went to school to learn to do. And that becomes our default pattern for life then. We spend our life looking for and solving problems. And that's not happiness. In fact, it's discontentment.
Not just that, but every television show and movie we see is based on problems.
Yes, it is. That's what makes it interesting. If they had television programs without problems, we wouldn't be interested in them.
So we're living in a society that's based on problems.
Well, you have a look at the news. The news is always negative because that's what interests people, problems. And if they see other people with problems, it makes them feel a little bit better about their own life because they don't have the problems. And so the news has always got negativity in it, not much positivity, because it's what people want to see. So you could start a good news channel on television and no one would watch it.
Nobody would watch it.
Yeah, whereas at the moment, I imagine in America, because of the riots and the trouble and the virus, people are watching television a great deal because it's interesting, it's full of problems.
Your wind chimes sound lovely.
You can hear them. Yeah, they're really big ones, those ones. They're almost 6 foot long, some of them. It's really cool. It's like being in a sound bath.
On a day-to-day basis, what makes you laugh?
You know, I find pretty much everything funny. I love human beings, you know. I just love human beings. I love talking to you. You make me laugh, but not in a cynical way, in a joyous way. It's, for me, laughter is a part of communication, a part of the celebration of life. And it breaks the mind patterns. So I see all the comedians on the planet as gifts because they're helping people get out of their heads. And so laughter is a celebration of just being.
Why Osho told jokes.
He did. He told a lot of jokes. I find that I don't laugh much when I'm by myself. I just very silent and very still. But when I'm in the company of human beings, there's a fair bit of laughter. It's play, because there's 7 billion people, or 7.5 billion people on the planet now, and they've all been put here to play with. You just have to be a little careful because most of them don't know that.
How do you know when to hit someone with the Zen stick?
For me, if someone is a student of mine, they've taken sannyas, I will tell them the truth. But if they're not a student of mine, I'm not likely to tell them anything. I'm here for the willing. I don't have an interest in the unwilling.
In Satsang, I've seen you every now and again. You get a question that you think is kind of silly. And you're like, I'm not answering that. That's a silly question.
Yeah, that's good. But that's a fair call. And you consider that a Zen stick. Ah, I see. It could be considered that way. One of the things that happens after awakening is you don't have an interest in approval. If people like you, that's good. If they don't like you, that's the same good. And so you don't have the same mannerisms that you had before, which were probably approval seeking. And so if someone asks a silly question, I tell them it's a silly question. Because whether they approve of me or they don't approve of me is not my business, it's their business, and it's definitely not my problem.
Fair enough. Well,
But
not only will you get hit with a silly question every now and again, or a futile question, but I mean, you have to constantly answer the same questions over and over and over and over.
I don't mind that.
It's the nature of the beast. Yeah.
It's the nature of what has to happen. Repetition. All spiritual teachers who are talking are saying things that have been said 1,000,000 times before they said them. There's nothing new under the sun. The answer to every question really is surrender. But spiritual teachers try to make it a little colourful to keep people interested. But ultimately, the only thing that we need to learn to be free is unconditional surrender.
Osho, in order to speak every day for 20 years, it's got to be some sort of record, but he would do commentary on something else, whether it was a whole discourse on Jesus or Buddha or Kabir or, Zen. He would pick something, right? And he stretched it out for like a whole week or two, and it became this whole thing.
Because
it was brilliant.
Yeah, but it was, come here, sit with me. Come here, sit with me, and I'll tell you a parable. But really, not about the parable. It's not about you learning anything. It's about you sitting with me and finding beingness as yourself. And that's what all awake teachers are doing. They come and sit with me and find beingness for yourself. Because someone who's awake is a doorway to truth, because awareness is aware of itself. There's a Buddha field, and in that Buddha field you can find yourself as truth. So Osho's methodology worked to some degree. I prefer to be way more interactive with people, and so I engage people constantly. But it's still the same deal. Come and sit with me and see what happens. And that's what happened for me. In sitting with Osho and sitting with my Advaita Vedanta teachers, I started to find myself as truth in their presence. So, Kevin. Come and sit with
me. Yep. It'll happen.
Thanks for listening to Inner Peace with Dr. Reese. If this episode opened your heart, feel free to share on social media and tell your loved ones. Also, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, may peace be with you.